Hello, and welcome to session number 4 of the African American Church and Social Justice. I am Pastor Scott Anquay, the very proud pastor of the St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church. Again, we want to thank our National Convention President, Dr. Jerry Young, our Congress President, Dr. Elliott Cuff, and our media coordinator, Dr. Alvin Love, for this opportunity. Hopefully by session 4, you have become fully engaged in the opportunity for your local church to be involved in social justice. Again, we are excited about this subject matter with all that is going on in our country. This is a time where the church can really get involved in this area of social justice. I'm going to share my screen shortly and then go through additional slides for this session. At this point, you should have read up to chapter number 3 in your book. And if you did want to do some pre-work, chapter number 4 would have been a good idea to read. We are almost done. This is 2 more sessions, and then we'll actually be done with the course. It's a 5-session course. And hopefully today, you'll get a lot out of it. And so I want to share my screen at this time. And again, this course is the African American Church and Social Justice course number 8035. And again, I'm Pastor Scott Anquay of the St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church of Chicago. And again, we are in session number 4 of the course. Now, we have actually covered quite a bit at this point. I'm just going to zoom through you. Again, your course book was to serve as present age. We talked about some of the things that causes us some concern. I've asked you to look at the documentary, I'm a Negro, I Am Not Your Negro, and hopefully you found that engaging and enriching. Also, we talked about the basis of the church in social justice, looking at Luke 4:18-19. When Jesus preached his first sermon, he quoted Isaiah 61, declaring that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So we understood that if we're going to be faithful to our call of God in Christ as a church, then the church needs to model the behavior, or at least emulate the mission and ministry of Christ. And so we talked about some historical quotes. We went through getting on board, understanding what social justice is. Some things that we want to continue to harp on is charity and justice. Charity representing love. The church has been good at charity or social services, but not so much as social justice. And so we have the definition of both, and you can have that in your syllabus. Dr. King says we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And so we talked about the biblical foundations for social justice, the cry of Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? We know that is a backdrop for our work. We know that traditional Christianity has taught for so long that what takes place on Sunday morning and what happens Monday through Saturday was separate, but we know that that is not true. We cover some other prophets in the Old Testament that spoke about the injustices that people were experiencing during their time. Amos, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and then all of the prophets addressed this theme of justice and injustice. And then also is included through Psalms as well as through Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. So social justice in the African American church helps the church understand what our role is when it comes to social justice and how we can get involved and also engage our membership to be involved in social justice. So we wanted to include some things that we know are absolutely true. The church has by far endured by rendering both social service and social justice. It has survived physically, mentally, and spiritually because of prophetic ministers and laypersons. We know recently John Lewis went on home to be with the Lord, Reverend Vivian. These are pillars in the social justice arena, doing great work on behalf of our cause. And we just really know that there's a lot of work that has been done. So we talked about some of the people that were involved in this, many names that you're familiar with, and then you can come up with your own names in your local cities, your local communities that have been involved in the work of social justice. And so we talked about that there always are competing stances or dialogues on how to approach social justice. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois were contemporaries, but they saw a different way of looking at how to achieve our goals. Further down the line, we found out that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X saw things differently, and as they started reconciling and coming close, Malcolm X was soon killed. You learned that in the documentary, I'm Not Your Negro. And so, but again, there's always going to be differences of opinions on how we get to the end goal, but the goal is to make sure we're doing something. And so we, in consistent with strong tradition, we must elect leaders with strong faith tradition. I don't know, at this time, this is a few days after the Democratic convention, which was virtually done. And we saw a stark contrast between who is currently in the White House and who is running for the White House. And one appears to have a strong tradition, a faith tradition, or highly principled. And the other, we just can't say much about at this point. So the voice of the faith community must be heard. This is our opportunity to voice our concerns. We are challenged every day as a Black church. And we have to remember that anyone pursuing social justice has to organize and mobilize, especially at this time. And we know that just because we had a Black president does not mean we have overcome or we have gotten rid of systemic racism. Even now, even the changes in the White House will not guarantee us a change in systemic racism, because he's a symptom of the problem and not really the root of the problem. Many times, what has happened, people are really enjoying this division that's going on in our country. People want this. There are white nationalists, and people still believe in white power. And then there's, on the other side, Blacks who don't want to ever, deal with whites. So there has to be a reconciliation, but we have to tear down the structure of systemic racism in order to get that done. And so we are presented with challenges in the form of globalization, assault on collective bargaining, mass incarceration, labor migration, deregulation of industries, outsourcing, the fight for workers' rights. So there's a lot of work to be done. We understand now that we have a lot of work in front of us. So what's the issues facing your community? That was a challenge that we had. We listed some of the things that were clearly on the table, poverty being number one, joblessness, environmental justice, water justice, food scarcity, pollution, mass incarceration, bail reform, healthcare reform, COVID. Oh my God, COVID has really revealed to us the disparities that we have in healthcare and how we as African Americans have less access to affordable healthcare. And that, for that reason, we are experiencing more deaths as well as greater exposure to the disease. And so we understand that Black Lives Matter protests are continuing right up to this day that I'm recording this. Police shootings just in Louisiana, just another man was shot by the police. And so there's an investigation. So that has not stopped. Inner city violence continuing. I'm in the city of Chicago, and every day we hear about, violence. I did a funeral for a young man yesterday, just 22 years old, and he was a victim of gun violence. So there's a lot of things going on in our communities, and so there's no time for the church to be silent. And so we talk about poverty rates. We know that blacks experience a poverty rate of 24.1% compared to whites of 9.1%. We know that clearly they're outpacing us in income. We struggle in the area of home ownership. We struggle in the area of emergency savings. There's a lot of things that we are dealing with in the area of poverty. And so, but Jesus said the poor, those who Jesus called the least of these, are not properly cared for even today. And so I asked you to read the New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which talks about some of these things that are going on in this sick system. People are trying to hold on to power, and power is never turned over. Power is taken. And that's why we have to be the voice for those that appear disenfranchised or maybe even powerless. And so we showed some charts, and I'm going to zoom past those. Again, I asked you to look at the documentary 13th, directed by Ava DuVernay. Excellent documentary. It talks about how mass incarceration is a system that was put in place after slavery, using the 13th Amendment as its backdrop. Just by the language of the 13th Amendment, it says Constitution abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. And they use that except to put false charges on people, lock people up for little minor things in order to continue to get free labor. We know our country was built on the labor of blacks, and it was free labor. And that's what, listen, it's an industry. People love cheap labor, free labor. And so that's how they acquired their wealth, because they use cheap or free labor. And we don't have the same benefit or luxury to do that. So I'm gonna move on. I told you we had opportunity to watch the documentary about the Kalief Browder story, about this young man that was locked up in Rikers Island in the city of New York, how his life came to a tragic end because he ended up taking his life after spending a couple years in the Rikers Island for being accused of stealing a book bag. And they wanted him to plead guilty to a crime that he did not commit. His parents did not even have $500 to get him out of jail. And so he suffered and languished in prison, and he really never came back to himself. And so even after he was released, he dealt with those demons, and he eventually took his life. And so we know that this is not a unusual story, because there's so many people that are being locked up right now because they can't afford bail, or there's many places that don't allow people to get out on their own. So we talked about having ministries in our church and how a ministry set up, and we looked at care for the soul. Let me just go back real quick on that. Care of the soul, education of the congregation and community, political awareness and action and collaboration. We wanted to make sure that we understood that that's the setup for a social justice ministry. Once you get into education of the congregation, you're moving into social justice, because you have to educate the congregation and community on the reason why you're establishing the ministry. So what are the issues today? Again, just to bring you some more clarity, there can be a housing ministry, prison ministry, health ministries. There's so many things you can think about in your church. You know what the community needs in the community that your church sits in. And so you need to be attuned to that. Talk to the community and find out. Matter of fact, the last day we'll be doing an assessment, and that assessment helps us identify what we need to do. But remember this, the crux of social justice is confronting institutions that systematically create inequity and produce needs. Remember that definition. Coming together across lines of race, religion, ethnicity makes justice issues matters of human rights and not the exclusive problem of one marginalized minority. Also, there's opportunities for you as you start doing this social justice work. I call them Faithful Citizens Workshop. That means you bring people together and you talk about issues. Right now, the hot issue is how do we make sure that everyone gets out the vote. Everyone is represented by November 3rd. The reason why I say by November 3rd, because we know that mail-in ballot voting has started. You can start requesting your mail-in vote. Also, not only can you start your mail-in voting, but early voting will be starting in many states as early as the end of September, and you can start your early voting. I myself am going to early vote, but I'm encouraging everyone to have faithful citizen workshops just around the topic of how do we make sure we exercise our right to vote, because we know that there are folks that are trying to do everything they can to make sure that the vote is not counted. If you're in states like South Carolina, you have very critical elections going on, because this might be an opportunity that you elect another African-American senator in the state of South Carolina. This, if you're in Georgia, a state may have two Democratic contenders for the position of senator. In Alabama, trying to retain the seat, Doug Jones is trying to retain his seat in Alabama. And I'm not saying that you need to vote straight Democrat. I'm just saying that vote for persons that are representing the policies that you want to see push forward. We see now even the fighting that's going on in DC about extending unemployment benefits, making sure that people have the proper needs around this COVID. People have lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods, lost their businesses, and they're giving up. They're becoming hopeless. And you know, when does the government help us? And this is the time that we really need to depend on the government. What they're doing to our postal workers, our post office system, trying to dismantle that. There's a lot going on that we can have conversations about, but the most important thing is to talk about the vote. So we want to get down to the nuts and bolts, laying the foundation. Remember that when developing a social justice ministry, it is equally important to build an infrastructure that will withstand challenges and changes in leadership, socioeconomic, demographics, and political realities over time. If you have any questions around that, that means that if you start something, it should be able to go after you leave. Even if the money dries up, you got to have a plan in action that continues the ministry. If it's important, then you have a way of making sure it's sustained. And so, again, we're in a political reality right now. Never thought we would see what we're seeing coming out of Washington, but this is where we are, where we're at. And so we have to deal with our political realities. And so remember this and keep this in mind. While the church may not have mega resources, it does have people committed to mega ministry. It's about people. It's about how people can come together and do the work of ministry. And so what social justice ministry will benefit your community that your church can develop? Again, that's up to you to decide. But remember, education and activism do not require an abundance of resources. Building a social justice ministry within the local church requires people committed to do the work of justice. Continue. The first step, we talked about establishing a 501c3. If that's the route you wanted to go, the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4. 501c3, tax deductible. 501c4, the contributions are not tax deductible. 501c3, you're restricted. And inside the book, it tells you about this. In chapter 3, you're restricted from making restricted from endorsing candidates and things like that. But you do have the opportunity to receive grants and things to further your ministry. If you want to do a 501c4, you're able to do lobbying and endorsements of candidates. But you have to decide what route you want. We talked about the Friendship West Baptist Church down in Texas and how they have been able to set up a great infrastructure. And that's in your book. Also in chapter 3, you want to look at that org chart and how their ministries are set up and how they touch so many areas in the area of social justice. And so we talked about having a mission. Make sure that your mission statement aligns with the mission statement of your church. You don't want to operate outside of the mission of your church. You want to make sure that you're still in line with your pastor. You want to talk with your pastor as you develop these mission statements for your ministry. But one thing that the social action community of the Friendship West Baptist Church they made it very clear that their goal was to strengthen the presence of people of color in the policy arena by combating destructive policy designs, unjust, unfair laws, policing regulatory guidelines, engaging in activism, direct action, and in educating citizens on issues to promote human rights as well as democracy. So keep that in mind as you start planning your social justice ministry. Okay, so some of the strategies that they use, they're committed to creating communities of opportunity by enlisting churches, community organizations, corporations, schools, collaboration. So remember, we talked about this thing about partnership and collaborative work. An old African proverb says that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go with someone. So keep that in mind that you want to have collaborations. And so their ministry is divided into 6 components. Those 6 components are economic empowerment, employment, criminal justice, legal, technology, and political. That does not mean you have to do those same 6 things, but that's what their church is doing down in Texas. You may have 3 things. You may have 7 things. You may do 10 things. It depends on what kind of church you have, what the infrastructure looks like, how many people you have committed to work. But whatever you do, you want to be successful in doing it. So you might just want to start with economic empowerment or start with political. You know, I work for a organization called Faith in Place. And what we do is we actually educate churches on how to become green. And one of our pillars is advocacy, political advocacy. And so as the policy director, I go around and talk to churches on how they can get involved in political advocacy, how they can go down to Springfield and talk about issues. We're pushing now for legislation around environmental justice, clean energy, making sure that we are positioned to be carbon free by 2050. And so it depends on what you want to do. But many of our churches in our convention, in our state convention, as well as our city district, partner with Faith in Place to help them in the political arena. So part of establishing a successful and sustainable justice ministry is a clear purpose statement of goals. Talked about that the last time we met. Again, the economic empowerment component said engage in and create opportunities for church and community practice, group economics, educate and advocate for economic justice, build up African-American owned businesses, stimulate and increase economic activity in the service sector, engage in community corporations through monitoring social responsibility programs. You can read that all in chapter 3. Okay, remember that from outside of the church, from outside of the physical walls of the church, many have explored doing the work of the church through various means. Ministries of justice are set up and organized from outside the church, but still do the work of the church based on the organization's sense of a call to ministry of justice. So that's why you can work with other organizations as you continue to do this work. I think I mentioned that we did food giveaways early on in COVID, and we partnered with Miles Square Clinic, which is a clinic part of the Illinois, University of Illinois, Chicago health systems. And also we partnered with a local Black-owned business. They created the lunches for us so that we didn't have to create the lunches. We made sure that a Black-owned business was still benefiting from the providing nice lunches each and every day to those that needed lunches. We use volunteers from the university as well as our church, as well as our community to make sure that the food was distributed. We did drop-off services. That means we called the people, told them to come to the door. We dropped the food off and kept going. And so we were able to successfully hand out 2,000 bags of food, and we're about to do it again because we realized that there are people that are still dealing with food scarcity, hungry. And in the state of Illinois, before COVID, there were 500,000 people easily that were dealing with food scarcity. And now that has literally increased twofold because of what's going on where people have lost their jobs and people are not working. There's not enough food. And so we know that people are dealing with some food scarcity. So you get to chapter 4, which is a great chapter, pursuing things for hope or things hoped for. We know that now faith is the substance of things hoped for and evidence of things not seen. The author really goes into helping us understand, that community development can be defined as a process of taking a community assessment, leveraging community assessments, connecting with outside resources to fill structural holes, and engaging in advocacy that leads to permanent change. Our goal is to lead to permanent change. We got to dismantle systems that perpetuate injustice or inequity. So please keep that in mind as we do the work. The author shows you actually what you have. In chapter number 4, we talk about this thing, what we call assets, capital. What do we have to work with? And you'll be surprised that churches have a lot more to work with than they really know. So the author breaks it down in a chart to talk about key community elements: physical capital, intellectual capital, or human capital, social capital, financial capital, and then also political capital. These things are listed in your book in chapter number 4. And so when you're thinking about such organizing and things hoped for, the biblical figure of Nehemiah should come up, because you think about Nehemiah, he was called, found out that his people were suffering because the walls were in disrepair, and that left their community vulnerable and left their people hopeless. And so remember, the work of social justice in a real way, a ministry of rebuilding or repairing the cracked and tumbled down structures of society that has created vulnerabilities for its citizens. I'll let that sink in for a second. Think about that. The rebuilding or repairing the cracked and tumbled down structures of society that have created vulnerabilities for its citizens. That is so deep and multi-level that I can go on all day talking about all of the vulnerabilities that our citizens experience because of tumbled down structures in society. Part of this work of the church is sharing the message of Jesus Christ and helping people understand how Jesus wants them to live. We know that the family structure has been torn down. We got to rebuild that. We know that it's a crying shame that 75% of our families in the African-American community are headed by single parent households, especially women. And that should not be, because God called us to be a family, a unit. And so we need to help the man get back in the family, help people raise families in 2-parent households so that they can do this together. When we think about the joblessness that is going on in our communities, young men of color experience a greater rate of unemployment, on up into the high 20%, because there are no jobs available. Then the dropout rate, of course, for African Americans is still disproportionate to others. Again, gaining wealth, we must look at what are the cracked and tumbled down structures of society that have created the vulnerabilities for its citizens. Healthcare is a tumbled down structure that has made us vulnerable in the age of COVID. Many of us suffer from hypertension, obesity, lack of food sources that will give us healthy meals, that have made us vulnerable, again, made us more likely to be affected by these diseases. Again, environmental racism or environmental injustice has allowed polluting companies to set up shop in our community, where we are breathing in poor quality air and suffering from high degrees of asthma and have high degrees of cancers and things like that. The EPA is currently rolling things back instead of enforcing guidelines to make sure that we are safe and we are protected from those that wish to gain on the backs of us. And so keep that in mind as that definition. And so one of the things that we must do ask the question, is this not the testimony of those who are called to be the voice on behalf of those who live on the margins of society by confronting injustices? Aren't we supposed to be doing this as Nehemiah went back to Jerusalem to inspect the walls? We ourselves need to inspect the walls and do a community assessment so that we'll know what we're working with and how we can actually better strengthen our communities. When Nehemiah heard about the plight of the Jewish remnant that remained behind in Jerusalem and the surrounding region, he wanted to help. What's our level of capacity to want to help when we see things are in disrepair? He wanted to rebuild the ruins of the people and in time and a place where safety was found within the walls of the city. And the priority task became rebuilding the walls of the holy city, Jerusalem. Nehemiah began with tapping into political capital. We know that he asked the king, could he go? After that, the king sent him on his mission. He arrived. He had some sustenance as he traveled, and he had the blessings of the king. When he got there, he needed to do a community assessment. So the work of social justice in a real way, again, is the ministry of rebuilding or repairing the cracked and tumbled down structures. So when you start inspecting the walls, the first thing Nehemiah did upon his return to Jerusalem was to inspect the walls of the city to determine their condition and develop an action plan. That's the same thing we should be doing. What is the condition of our communities? What's our action plan for remedying those conditions? Or do we actually have a plan? Because if we don't have a plan, we should plan to fail. So we have to start with getting a plan. So the motivation for inspecting or a given wall may come in the form of one or more social justice issues demanding our attention. What's going on in your community that you want to address? Again, it may be homelessness, it may be street violence, maybe police brutality, maybe healthcare, maybe food scarcity, maybe environmental justice. What has caused your community to be vulnerable? With this in mind, the first step is to assess the specific nature of the situation. For Nehemiah, the inspection of the walls was the first step toward rebuilding the temple, which was the symbol of God's presence with the Jewish people. For us, we got to what are we going to rebuild? Maybe rebuild the family, get the church involved. I say this often, and I might have already said it, but I believe that if your church closes down today and your community does not miss you, then you shouldn't have been there in the first place. And because we're supposed to be making an impact on the community that we reside in. So when we think about the undertaking, it may seem enormous. It may seem enormous, but it was impossible to consider a major reconstruction of the fallen temple without strong walls. So you have to you got to prioritize, what do I do first? So he had to fix the walls before they can repair the temple, because if they repair the temple, then the temple still will be vulnerable to the enemy. And we know when we read the book of Nehemiah, he faced some great challenges. Sanballat and them, they were trying to discourage him, and he had to stay faithful to his call. And you're going to have some discouragers that's going to tell you that it's too much for you. Don't get yourself involved in that. The church has no business dealing with such things. You have to ignore such talk, because your goal is to become a resource to the community and make a difference by way of addressing the needs of social justice. Now remember this, communities might have more social, intellectual, physical, and financial capital than seems readily apparent. You have to do an assessment to find out, what do you have to work with? And when you find out what you have to work with, you can go back to that chart and realize that you may have some physical capital. Your physical capital, I think I mentioned already, your church can double as an auditorium for a rally. Your church, your fellowship hall can double as a area for a resource center where you can get information to people. You have physical capital, intellectual capital. You never know who you have in your congregation. that can help in this effort. You may have some people that already work in this arena that's only been waiting for someone to tap into them and ask them how can they assist in doing what you call to do. An assessment can begin with brainstorming what is in the community. For example, you may do internet search to determine how many post-secondary institutions, intellectual capital, are in the community. You can partner with your neighborhood university. Not too far from us, we have Chicago State University, which is on 95th. We're able to utilize some of their students to partner with some of the work. So you can partner with universities in Hyde Park, which is not too far from us. Also, we have the University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. And we know that they are constantly inviting Black churches over to do work. We've partnered with them on many things. And so again, look at the intellectual capital. These doctors, we set up a organization at our health ministry called Acts of Faith. And we partnered with the University of Chicago and one of their doctors. And we set up a great organization called Acts of Faith, where we actually help other churches deal with their health issues, health disparities. And again, I didn't have to be the expert because the experts were the doctors at the University of Chicago. They lended us their resources. When I say resources, I mean capital, financial capital. They put the bank in. And again, we were able to do that with 11 initial churches on the South Side. We coordinated the efforts, and those 11 churches were part of the initial Acts of Faith organization. We were able to train and hire individuals to do work around as counselors when people are going through chemotherapy. We were able to employ people, put people to work, to be grief counselors, because they wanted to find out what our members were being taught spiritually and ministry, and they were able to use what they were being taught to help just sit with patients and have some conversation and show them what Christ is all about. Again, some of your social capital may be some of the gangs in your neighborhood. You can't be afraid of the gangs. You have to speak to the gangs and help them understand that if they would put their minds to doing some good, how they can actually transform their neighborhood. So again, physical capital, social capital, the community of faith is placed in the center to represent the starting point. So you're in the center to represent the starting point. In your book, you'll find where the author actually puts the community of faith in the center, and then they have positions that look almost like a clock, and they talk about how those positions are all filtered into the middle, where the elite community partner is the church. There's intellectual capital or educational organizations. There's also political capital, government links. You know, I'm very connected to my local state reps, my state senator, also my commissioner, my alderman. I'm very involved in staying connected with them so that they'll know what I need. I can offer them advice and they can give me services. Your church needs to be involved in that. You need to reach out to all of those elected officials because they come to see you during election time. Let them partner with you even when it's not an election. Again, physical capital talks about the space that we have. Your building can occupy hundreds or even thousands of people if necessary, depending on the size of your church. So make sure you use that properly. Financial capital, there are grants out there. How do you tap into those grants? You may have a grant writer. Even if you don't have a grant writer, you can partner with an organization that has grant writers. Again, Faith in Place is doing a grant to local churches in the Chicago area. And what we're doing is giving churches that did food feeding during COVID grants. And so they didn't have to write the grant. All they had to do was apply with a one-page application, put their church name, talk about what they're doing, and we've been able to dispense, we're gonna be able to dispense $80,000 to some local churches Some churches may get 1,000, some churches may get 5,000. Depends on what, the size of their efforts, but it's something to help them in their efforts. Again, social capital, your fraternities and your sororities are a good resource. Keep that in mind. Many times they're doing things in their community. They have a lot of volunteerism. Your high schools, they have to do the same thing. The high school students must get hours of community service. And so they can partner with you to do a Saturday food giveaway, or to look at how they can help you build your internet connection or your web pages and all that kind of stuff. Those that are taking civics, they can help you in the political arena, and they will be glad to get involved. We took high school students down to Springfield, and they were able to deliver thousands of petitions to the governor, asking the governor to make sure that he considers their future when it comes to climate change. That was very impactful. And so again, partnering with people around you. So the first thing Nehemiah did, again, return to Jerusalem, was to inspect the walls of the city to determine their condition and develop an action plan. Remember, make sure you develop an action plan. That is absolutely necessary, an action plan. Okay? How do we do that? Well, we have to do a community assessment. A community assessment. Who are we, and who are the folks that are around us? Inside your syllabus, and as well as inside your book, there are a community landscape assessment that I would like for you to complete before our final session. In that, you're going to talk about who's representing the community, local, municipality, and well as county. Who are the elected officials at each level? Who represents your district? Consider the residences of church leaders and parishioners and the church building, where you're located. What are the core issues? Are these core issues consistent with the church and the community's core issues? What is the background of the local officials? What is the track record of local officials of making positive, sustained changes? How often do local officials interact with their community? Do they host town hall meetings? Do they keep the community abreast of changes downtown that will affect the community before they happen? Do local officials stay in contact with community beyond election day? You look at that and answer those questions. Also, as you do your community assessment, I need you to look at, do local officials serve on any committees? What are these committees? What are their positions on such committees? What is the track record of local officials on introducing or voting on legislation that impacts the community being served by the church? Again, I'm strong on environmental justice, on social justice. I'm strong on jobs. And so I hold the feet to the fire for elected officials. I want to see legislation that's going to bring jobs to my communities. I want to see legislation that's going to stop climate change. I want to see legislation that's going to move us towards renewable energy. I want to see legislation that's going to benefit our community, electrification of vehicles. This is the kind of stuff that I like to talk about, but yours may be different. How do we stop the violence in our community? How do we make sure the resources are there? How do we make sure that folks are getting quality health care in our community? So I'm always thinking about, how do I engage the political landscape to do all of this? Now, remember, this is not an exhaustive survey. You can expand the list of survey questions as you seem suited to your community. Note that addressing a given issue will move the investigation beyond the people who represent the church community to key representatives who may need to be contacted about other issues. So as you dive into this, basically, it grows. And so don't be afraid that it grows, because you never know as you start peeling the onion back on how much you will find and what things you need to address. And so also part of your assessment, you want to know who is out there, who is known, who is not known. Not everybody who's known is doing work, but there's some people who are doing work that's not known. So take an inventory of individual decision makers who are located in the immediate community and beyond. Not all need to know people exist in one place. Create a list of their names and their other critical information, which individuals already known by people involved in the church's social justice ministry. For instance, we know that here in the city of Chicago, Jesse Jackson Sr. is a pivotal figure. He runs Operation Push. That organization does a lot of social justice work, a lot of social service, excuse me, social services work. So, excuse me. Oh, so we want to, I lost my voice. So we want to look at those particular organizations as whose are the influencers. And those influencers are important. So we take an assessment with a degree of skill to know where they fit in the place they fit in accordingly. Also, as we do our assessment, we want to do community and congregational profile. What is your church made up of? What is the ethnic makeup of the city and the immediate community surrounding the church? That can be gathered from the census. Our last census was done in 2010. We're in the middle of a census right now, 2020. That's why we do the census, so we'll know where everybody is. City Hall records, reports produced by local research, newspapers have that kind of information also. What's the economic profile of the city? So I mean, how do you, what's the engine that drives your income in your city? What's the ethnic makeup of the public schools by district? In the city of Chicago, of course, 97% of our schools are Black. But then when you get out to the Cook County suburbs, the makeup changes. And then when you get out to the other suburbs, Will County and things, it changes drastically, it flips, where it's majority white. So what's the city's economy? Textiles, agriculture, manufacturing. In the city of Chicago, many people don't realize, but our source of economic, our economy is tourism. We depend a lot on people coming to our city, a lot of people coming and spending money at our restaurants, our hotels. Many of our residents are actually employed at hotels downtown, CTA, getting on the buses, the trains, things like that. So we know we largely depend on tourism. Another question you may ask, how many households are in the community? How many are headed by single parents? How many are headed by grandparents? The reason why we ask that is because you may want to do a grandparent ministry that helps grandparents who are raising their children alone. And we know that that's the case many times in our community, where the grandmother is raising her grandchildren because the mother or the father is no longer able to do so. And so we may want to be able to get information, social justice information, to make sure that there are legislation that benefits grandparents who are raising children. How many quality grocery stores are in your neighborhood? We know that in some neighborhoods, they have multiple grocery stores. And in some neighborhoods, they don't have any grocery stores. Many of our communities are housed in food deserts. The very definition of a food desert is that if you don't have a grocery store within 1 mile of the radius of where you live, you may be living actually in a food desert. And so if you live in a food desert, that means you're not getting fresh vegetables, fresh produce and meats and milk and that kind of stuff. And so we have to make sure we hold people to the fire. In South Shore, the community that I actually live in, which is a beautiful community, we were in a food desert for 6.5 years. One of the major grocers closed down, and that building stayed vacant for 6.5 years. And so the closest store was over a mile and a half, 2 miles away. And so for me, it wasn't that bad because I have a car. I can jump in the car and ride, you know, it's not a problem. But for many of the residents that rely on public transportation, many of the seniors, they rely on public transportation, that was a problem. And so they were in a food desert. And so what do you resort to? You start resorting to corner stores for your groceries. And again, if you're not getting healthy foods, you're literally being starved. Even right now, people who are obese are actually starving themselves because they're not eating nutritious food. They're eating, you know, goodies and Flamin' Hots and all kinds of crazy snacks that offer no nutritional value whatsoever. And so their brain is not getting the nutrients for them to even think clearly. Many of our children go to school literally starving because they're not getting the nutrients they need in order to have the right thinking capacity. So what's the history of your city? You know, this city of Chicago is a migration city for the African Americans. You know, many people who came to Chicago came from states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Those states, they just came and migrated up straight to Chicago looking for a better life. And so you need to know what the history of your city is. One of the things we found out in this current movement where people were tearing down statues of from the Civil War, and they were part of the Confederacy. And people who knew the history of the city wanted those removed because they realized that the Confederate was actually going against our country. And so they weren't just a statue. Those are statues were placed as intimidation statues to make sure blacks knew to stay in their place. And so, again, knowing your history helps you know what fight you're going to fight. Also, when you think about your congregation, where do your members live? One of the things we found out in the church demographics is not like it used to be. Many of the churches that were established, especially during the early migration when people were in cities, people went to church, to the church that was closest to them, their neighborhood church. Many people walked to church. That's why many churches didn't have parking lots, because no one had to actually drive to church. They were able to walk to church. That has changed because many people have moved out to the suburbs, church locations have changed, but people retain their membership. Now I have members coming 40 minutes away or more just to come to church because they have a connection to my ministry. But then we have people who were raised in the church. Their grandmother went to this church, their mother went to this church. So they're part of the church, but they live out in the suburbs. And then we have a group of people that actually live in the community that we have reached out to and have made this church their church. So again, where do the members live? Do most of them live in the vicinity of the church? If not, in what areas do they reside? That's going to really affect your ministry because, again, if you're community focused, you need some people from the community to be a part of your church because your members have to understand that they have a vested interest because the church's location. But that's hard to do when people ride in and ride out. They ride in and they ride out. So they don't have a vested interest in the church. And many of our pastors do the same thing. They ride in and they ride out. I live actually in the community that my church is in, a few blocks away. It works out well because it keeps me connected to the needs of my community. And so, again, the demographics of the church. What's the economic breakdown in your membership? Some churches are resourced very well. They have doctors, lawyers, professionals, politicians, and people who make a whole lot of money. And then you have some churches that just have working class people. And then you have some churches that have a mixture of those kind of individuals. I thank God that I have a great diversity in economic breakdown of my membership. So that keeps us afloat. So we're able to do ministry because we have the affluent, but then we also have a good amount of those that are in need. Small businesses, how many small business owners do you have in your church? Every church needs to establish what I call a blue book to help you understand who does what. Hair, barbers, lawn services, carpenters, construction, heating and cooling. Why not use those individuals first in your needs? So we do an assessment to find out who does what in the community or in the church, so you're able to use them first. And believe me, it works, because if you employ those folks, those tithes come right back to the church. What are the ages in the church? Some churches are aged out, I call them. Everyone is 56 and above. You know what I mean? They don't have a lot of presence of young people, or 13, 18, or young adults, as they say. And that's a problem that we're having in the church today. How do you recruit those individuals, you know, in order to build the areas, the gaps up? Again, looking for structural changes in order to identify vulnerabilities. If the church doesn't add new people, the church eventually is going to die. The local church, I mean. So what are the number of households? How many households are headed by single mothers, single fathers, single grandparents? What's the ethnic makeup of the or the country of origin? All of this is in your book, and you can look at those, and I would encourage you to complete this before the next class. And then to make it personal, think about the core values of who you are, your church. How long has your church been in the community? This is the assessment I really need you to do. If you don't do the other ones, I need you to do this and email this to me. The core values of your church. How long has your church been in the community? What does your church do best? Maybe education, maybe worship, maybe social justice, maybe a number of things. But what does your church do best? Where does blank do its best work? Do your church do a lot of work in the community, or is it just inside the church? When addressing issues, what's the church's commitment and time frame? Again, you got to talk to your pastor, because your pastor may say, well, this is not time for us to do this. We got to respect what your pastor says. But if you have time and commitment, how do we get started? How will resources be allocated? Will there be a line item for social justice in your next budget? And if so, how much would it be? Who will be responsible for strategy and operational procedures? Where will the power to make decisions reside? Is it going to be a joint decision, or is it going to be one person making the decision? Is it going to be pastor-led decision? You have to make that decision as you do that. And then after you do all that, your next step is taking the issue to the people. If you're going to get to pursuing things hoped for, you have to engage the people. Upon completing the typology for community development, the next step is placing the issues before the people. After Nehemiah surveyed the walls, he had an idea of the strength and weaknesses of the community. He formed a development plan and then communicated the state of the community to the people. That's what you're going to do. After you do all of this work, you're going to take it to the people and see if you can engage the people to get involved, because you can't do it alone. You must recruit individuals. Again, you may not have a mega ministry, but you do have mega people. Okay? And so I'm gonna let me do this definition right here, because we're gonna go into the next chapter of organizing, and that is super important too, on how do we organize and how do we continue to make sure we are effective in our organizing. And so let's do let me do this real quick. In that chapter 4 is a wealth of information that I really would encourage you to read. Okay, so remember that in order to do this, you have to sustain the work. There's no need of getting started if you're not going to actually sustain the work. And so you must understand what organizing is all about, okay? And so we're going to talk about that as we close out this lesson. But organizing can be defined as pursuing individuals to commit to a given cause or organization by arranging and communicating issues in a systematic manner. Amen. And so please read all of chapter 4, and please read chapters 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are short chapters. And so you want to go ahead and read those. And as we consider how we move forward and complete this task of building a social justice ministry. And so again, this is Pastor Scott Onquay, the proud pastor of the St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church in the city of Chicago, and giving you the session 4 of the African American Church and Social Justice course number 8035. And I pray that you have been blessed by this evening's engagement, and hopefully you will tune in tomorrow as we continue to build this thing called social justice. I am signing out and saying goodbye, and God bless you as well as God keep you is my prayer.